Hello everyone, it's Retro Martin here, and it's time to look at another MegaDrive game. We're going to be looking at P-47 2MD, which was subjected to a little bit of a problem back in the day. So originally, the Freedom Star, or P-47 the Phantom Fighter, as it was known in the arcades in 1988, was supposed to release for the MegaDrive by Jaleco way back in the day, and it ended up being cancelled, which was a bit of a shame, of course. This year, it managed to pick up a publisher and has been released properly for the MegaDrive 30 odd years after it was supposed to. In fact, nearly 40 years after it was supposed to. A slight change in name as well to P-47 2MD as well, rather than the initial name of the Freedom Star. So this is a side-scrolling shoot-'em-up, which is a sequel to the original P-47, hence the 2 in the title, of course. And today I was able to go hands-on with it, courtesy of my copy from RetroBit, who managed to deliver down to me here in the UK, thankfully. I was able to go through the entire game on my first sitting. Had a quick look through. There's 3 difficulty settings: easy, normal and hard. Like a lot of the time I play shoot-'em-ups, I actually played this on easy to see if I was able to manage it, because I can find shoot-'em-ups quite frantic at times. So I thought, yeah, I'll give it a try on easy. But I think I'll go through and try on normal or hard after playing it through on this time. I did, however, bump the lives up to 5, which ended up being a bit of a godsend at the end. But otherwise, it's a very standard shooter. Your A and B buttons shoot, and your C button is your special, which is a screen-destroying explosion. You don't have to tap the buttons. It's hold down for rapid fire, which is great for controller wear and tear. I'm not a huge fan of tap shooting anyway. I don't think it makes you any better or anything like that, because I can tap incredibly fast anyway, so I sometimes end up shooting faster than the rapid fire does on those sorts of games. So it's not really a test for me. I'd much rather keep my controllers relatively intact though, rather than having to ram the rubbish out of them. So it's set across what appears initially to be 6 stages, with loads of enemies coming at you, and at the end a big boss made up of your usual types, like a armored tank, a blimp, and of course the battleship Yamato, because what wouldn't it be without the Japanese referring to that in one of their games. It is a very cool boss fight, of course. When I started out, I thought it was quite sedate in terms of the actual gameplay. Like, it was a fun shooter, there was plenty going on screen, but it was quite easy to wrap your way around all of the missiles and shots. So it's definitely beginner friendly to start with. You can get hit, and what it will do is it will just power you down somewhat. It takes you a couple of hits before you actually lose a life. I managed to get all the way up to stage 5 before I lost my first life. I genuinely thought I was going to get a 1cc on my first attempt, which would have been very impressive. It does take a little while before it starts to ramp the difficulty up. Stage 4 comes along, which is set up in the clouds, and that tends to get a lot of flickering. It's the only stage that actually gets some flicker, probably because there's an awful lot going on, because you've got some foreground clouds and background clouds, but there's a lot of missiles and a lot of shots as well. There's one bit where you're just getting utterly assailed by missiles, and it can become quite difficult to dodge and shoot most of them, but that's where the difficulty starts to ramp up. And then when you get to the final stages, you've got some very thin gaps to go through. It's a little bit mazy. And like most shoot-'em-ups, if you lose your power-ups, it makes the game incredibly difficult, to the point where you're then going to start losing again and again and again, because you need a couple of speed-ups to get anywhere. So yeah, like a lot of other shoot-'em-ups, this one relies on you picking up speed power-ups to finally make your ship slightly more maneuverable. The starting speed is utterly woeful, to the point where the game is actually quite difficult on the starting speed, but it's still manageable. You can pick up power-ups to power up your main weapon, which is just a normal shot. It goes from like 1 to 2 to 4. So you can pick up new weapons. For starters, there's a power-up which powers your shot up from 1 to 2 to 4. You can pick up more of your bombs, the one-shot destroy moves. And there are also 4 different types of upgrades. So one is the 3-way, which obviously shoots in a diagonal direction. You've got bombs, which basically just drops loads of bombs on the surface. There's one where it gets an additional plane, which acts almost like a shield that you move around. That one can be quite difficult to use. And I believe there's another one, but I can't think what it is off the top of my head while I'm saying this. But otherwise, there's a good little spread of weapons. It was all very, very enjoyable. Oh, I remember what it is now. It's a homing missile. So the 4th weapon is a homing missile, which is very, very handy, especially on the later stages when you've got a lot going on. The weapons do make life an awful lot easier in the game. So, yeah, you definitely want to be holding on to them. The music is good. It's not anything spectacular. It's not going to win any awards, but it's quite boppy. You can hum along to it. It's quite memorable, and each ditty fits its particular area quite nicely. So it's, like I said, it's not going to win any awards, but it's a very enjoyable soundtrack. The visuals are quite good. You can tell this would have potentially been an earlier Mega Drive game, so sort of like the late 80s or like a 1990, 1991 game. We're not exactly talking Thunder Force 3 or 4 here in terms of the visuals, but there's a lot of really nice backgrounds. There's some foreground stuff going on as well. The palette will slowly change on 1 or 2 of the levels as you go through it to simulate going into darkness or nighttime. Which is a really nice visual touch. When you're at sea, you get some small amounts of waves and wave displacement as well when you're down there or you're shooting it. So that's quite nice. It makes the game look really, really good. So visually, I really enjoyed the game. I thought there was a good mix of locales. It looked really, really nice. So it was fun to blast through. The enemies themselves can be quite basic. There's quite a lot of very small aircraft which don't have any detailing to them, but some of the bigger stuff looks really, really nice. The bosses look utterly phenomenal. They're very detailed. They've got a lot going on, lots of different pieces to hit. There are some really big aircraft that take quite a while to destroy as well, so there's plenty of things to be shooting through, which is the hallmark of any good shoot 'em up. So yeah, P-47 2MD. It can be a bit easy to start off with. It gets insane, or at least very hard for certain people, towards the latter 2 stages with an awful lot going on, and you will have to abuse your bombs somewhat and hope you don't die and lose all your speed ups. But yeah, very, very enjoyable game. If I'd have been bought this back in the day, I certainly would have enjoyed it. I did manage to complete it on my first sitting. Obviously, whether that's lots of practice at shoot 'em ups or whether it's just the difficulty of the game, I don't know, but I'd like to give it a try in hard mode and see how I get on with that. However, the video does not end here despite this miniature review. I'm going to be putting up the entire run through, so if it's not a game you want to pick up, or if you just want to see how it looks like in its entirety and see if I'm talking absolute cobblers about the visuals, please watch the rest of the video. It should take a little over half an hour, I believe, to watch the entire playthrough. You will see me die quite a lot towards the end, mostly because of the lack of speed ups after my 1 or 2 deaths. But I did manage to complete it, so I hope you enjoy. I hope you've also liked listening to this miniature review, and I will see you in the next video.
Bye.